One. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Welsh Republic podcast, episode 168 today. And I'm here with my guest, Rachel Blevins. This is the second time she's been on. This is the second time she's come on my show. How are you doing, Rachel? Is everything all right with you?
I'm doing well, just trying to keep up. I know it's been a crazy few weeks in the news world, and so just trying to stay on top of everything and follow all of the latest. But other than that, all good here.
Yeah, it is. It has really been a banana show, hasn't it? Like you've had this, you have that, you've had the ceasefire debacle, you've had, Trump just. I really think he's been drinking too much orange juice lately.
Right.
I really think he has, and it's like, oh, it's ridiculous. Anyways, Rachel, speak before we get on to serious things. How's everything been with you today? What have you been up to today so far?
Yeah, it's been good here today so far. I just wrapped up an interview earlier today. I'm trying to think. I love how you asked me what did I do today. I'm like, what did I do today? But yeah, I wrapped up an interview earlier actually with Danny Haifong. He's another, podcaster and journalist on YouTube. And we kind of talked about the latest, a lot of the topics that we'll be getting into and kind of where foreign policy stands. And so I'm in the process of editing that. And yeah, it's been a pretty busy standard workday for me here. How's everything going for you there?
It's going all right, Rachel. Here in New Zealand, it's freezing. The weather's been a bit better, but we're doing okay. Which is apparently, I'll tell you one thing: our prime minister was meeting with the Ukrainian prime minister about military stuff. Oh, stupid bloody Luxon! But
Yeah.
New Zealand, as they
Cut out.
Rachel, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now. Sorry, I don't know if that cut
Yeah,
out on my end. It very well may have though.
yeah, yeah. Is your connection going a bit off today? Pretty much with what's going on.
It's actually been doing okay. It's been having a good day, so I'm hoping it cooperates now and
Yeah,
stays
yeah,
afloat.
yeah, yeah. That's okay. Yeah, I was just saying, Rachel, that yeah, it's been with that interview with what's his name, the guy you just did. What would you say was
Yeah,
the
yeah,
most
with Danny
important
Haifong.
in the most important information like that you shared when you were talking to him about with the interview with him? The most important moment.
Oh, that's a good question. I think that he does a really good job at kind of looking at the bigger picture of things, right? Because it's good to have a conversation about, the little details, kind of what Trump said, what we're hearing from Iran, what we're hearing from Israel, and what that means overall in terms of the conflict and where things are going. Danny made some really good points, so I will say, about looking at the bigger picture, how this affects the multipolar world. And I think that that's really important to keep in mind, especially as we're kind of going through and dissecting everything and trying to figure out, okay, is there a ceasefire between Israel and Iran? Is there a chance that it actually lasts? And then also, what does this mean for the broader multipolar world as you have, Russia and China in this position where they are allied with Iran in a number of different areas? They provided support to Iran, but at the same time, they're also kind of weighing how to handle these tensions with the main country that seems to want war with everyone, which is, of course, the United States. The US is in this place of waging all of these different proxy wars at once. And for countries like, especially Russia and Iran, but China is also kind of there on that back burner, they're in the position of trying to figure out, okay, how do we handle things? How do we really handle the US without giving the US exactly what it wants? Because the neocons in Washington have a plan for just about everything when it comes to the ways in which they want to try to really destroy the multipolar world as a whole.
Mhm. What is your opinion on the whole thing about the nuclear, incident? Because like, you got a lot of like the Israeli media saying the nuclear facilities was just destroyed. Trump said they were destroyed, but they're actually not. Would you like to clarify what's really happening with the nuclear facilities, if they are damaged or if they're not?
Yeah, that's been an interesting thing to follow. I thought it was notable that Iran came out in terms of the reports that we heard, rather, I should say, from the anonymous Iranian sources immediately after the US carried out strikes targeting 3 different facilities on early on Sunday morning. And we had these reports coming out saying that Iran had already cleared out these facilities, right? That they've taken the 60% enriched uranium that they have and that they've moved it to undisclosed locations. And when I saw those initial reports, I thought that honestly would not surprise me because they knew that these strikes were coming, right? They knew that the US was trying to get all of its assets into place, that even though the White House was saying that, oh, Trump will, figure this out in 2 weeks' time as to whether or not he wants the US to join in on direct strikes against Iran, we all kind of knew that it was likely to happen before then and that there was likely to be an attack. So if I'm in Iran's shoes and I'm thinking, how would they prepared for this? They're probably going to get everything that they possibly can out of those facilities and make sure that, whatever equipment, whatever enriched uranium they have, that is placed elsewhere and that it's not then targeted by the US. And then immediately after, we had reports from the IAEA saying that it didn't appear that there was any kind of nuclear fallout coming from these facilities, basically to say that enriched uranium wasn't there and or it wasn't targeted, otherwise we would have seen evidence of it. And so for Trump to come out immediately and claim that, oh, these facilities have been completely destroyed, that Iran's nuclear capabilities have been obliterated, well, that appears to just be posturing and propaganda from everything that I've seen so far. I did think it was notable, though, that even as we have this back and forth with Trump kind of using these claims in order to justify a ceasefire, right? He's saying that we need to pursue a ceasefire with Iran because they do not pose any kind of nuclear threat anymore. And his initial claim was, of course, that the only reason that the US and Israel were targeting Iran to begin with was because they were, just weeks away, days away from creating a nuclear weapon, which is what we've been hearing from Washington, D.C. for decades now. But then you start getting these reports out in the US media, citing anonymous sources, of course, that say that they're looking at these initial US intelligence assessments. And yeah, sure, maybe these attacks set Iran's civilian nuclear program back by a few months, but that they didn't really do much more than that they did not destroy it all together. And then today you have Trump's director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, coming out and declaring to the public that, oh, the media is just lying to you, right? That in all actuality, there was a lot of destruction, that what Trump was saying was right. And I think that that's so interesting. It kind of gives us a little bit of a look into the overall of Trump's inner circle, because poor Tulsi Gabbard has been fighting to, stay relevant and for Trump to keep her in that inner circle ever since she testified to Congress back in March that, as the US intelligence community sees it, that Iran is not in the process of developing a nuclear weapon, and that Iran's supreme leader has not renewed their nuclear weapons program that he shut down back in 2003. So she is in a place of trying to work overboard, but I do think it's interesting to see all of the information that we have coming in right now. We have yet to see proof that Iran's nuclear program has been completely destroyed, but that, of course, hasn't stopped Trump from making those claims. And I'm really curious to see how he's going to proceed forward, because this claim that Iran is a nuclear threat has been the cornerstone of everything that we've heard from Washington in order to try to target Iran. So it's like, okay, well, if they're not that threat anymore, you're claiming, then how do we proceed? Because the US has to make Iran out to be a threat in some way.
Mm-hmm. I think it's basically, WND's 2.0. By the way, you got a nice mug there. It's a cool mug you got there.
Thank you. That is my Austin mug that I have. I think that's a Texas Longhorn on that side, and then it says Austin on the other side. So it's representative of Texas here.
That's really cool. Rachel, when you look at like Iran's operation, like True Promise 2, from your knowledge and for what you've examined so far, what would you say? Sorry, when you look at Iran's operation of True Promise 3, would you say that Iran's operation was successful and it shattered the Zionist, regime's illusion of Israel's invincibility of the area, in the invincibility they have of the area, the so-called invincibility they have? And especially, when the Israeli government was telling people to censor a lot of, the strikes that missile strikes that Iran were launching onto Israel. What do you think?
Yeah, I do think that, it's interesting that you bring that up in terms of success, because I know that there are a lot of people on the internet right now that are looking at it and that are like, no, we do not see it as successful. But I think for what it was in terms of a retaliatory attack, yes, I would say that it was successful, right? You compare it to the other versions of these True Promise attacks that Iran has carried out. And this was really definitely the largest version of it, but it also came on the heels of the attack that was carried out by Israel and by the US. I will throw them in there as well, in which they specifically targeted Iran's military command, right? With these assassinations that they carried out, they targeted Iran's air defense, their ballistic missile factories, their nuclear facilities, and so on and so forth. So Israel and the US carry out this major attack. And the goal of that attack is not just the destruction that they carried out within Iran or even the civilians that were killed. The goal is to put Tehran in a position where they look around and they feel like they can't trust anyone, right? They're constantly questioning, okay, these attacks, many of them were carried out inside Iran by these so-called moles, right, who have sold out to Israel. And so when you're in that position, when you lose some of your top commanders, when you lose nuclear scientists, when you're questioning who you can trust, that puts you in this position where you're looking around going, how do we respond? And given the response that we did see from Iran, I would say that that was incredibly successful. And I think that you're right there when it comes to the fact that this shattered the illusion that was held for so long in Israel and in the United States, I think, too. I mean, the American taxpayers spend God knows how much money every year on not just supporting Israel, but also on, the Iron Dome and David Sling and all of these other air defense related systems and projects that they have special names for. And that is all with the thought that Israel is going to be completely protected, that they cannot be attacked. And yes, we've seen as Ansar Allah in Yemen has shattered that illusion to a certain extent. But what Iran did here was they embarked on a series of retaliatory attacks that just kept coming. And you really knew that Israel was being hit based on all of the propaganda that was out there, right? Every day you could get online or even look in the media and you would see all of these claims that Iran is on the verge of falling apart, that they've run out of ballistic missiles, that, so on and so forth. And so because that illusion was shattered in such a way, I think that that's why you had the US and Israel in this position of even pushing for a ceasefire. Because if they thought that they could be successful in regime change in Iran, which is, of course, one of their biggest goals, then they would not have backed down. We would not have any kind of ceasefire agreement. But because they realized that, oh, hey, we did all of this and it did not end in the desired results. And on top of that, now Israel is seeing all of this destruction. Israel is being targeted. And really, this paradigm that has been held for so long has been shattered. Then you start getting that talk about a ceasefire, and you have Israel and the US in this place where they're still trying to act like they quote unquote won this war. I don't think that the war is over just yet. But they're in this position where they're doing everything that they can to convince the public, hey, we won this one. And it's like, if you were winning this, we would still be at war. I don't think that they would be asking for a ceasefire just yet.
No, I don't think it's over yet. Because Israel, of course, is doing this for the Greater Israel Project, and anyone who thinks that Trump and Netanyahu are fighting, of course they're not. It's all an act. It's all a deception. That's what Mossad says. War through deception. That's what its slogan is. And it's basically an op. It is very it was very chaotic, Rachel, especially with the ceasefire thing. Oh my God, that was just. It was like, what was going on? It was like someone was saying this, someone was saying that. It was like, oh, and then I mean, Rachel, do you think it's pretty obvious Trump was doing it for a Nobel Peace Prize? Of course he was. Of course he was.
I think he does want that on his record. But I think too, the position that he's in where the US did carry out these strikes over the weekend. And of course, the US is going to claim that they completely obliterated Iran's nuclear facilities. I mean, they dropped several of these massive bunker buster bombs. And so they need to make it look like they did something. But when you look at the way that Iran retaliated on Monday, I think that that was really a notable part in all of this because Iran could have carried out a massive attack targeting US military bases in the region. We could see American soldiers being killed and coming home in body bags. But what that would have done is that would have just put the US in a position where they could then bomb Iran again, right? And continue on with this attack and widen this war and further pursue regime change in Tehran. But because Iran reached out to Qatar and said, hey, we're letting you know we're going to carry out this attack, they gave Qatar the time to shut down their airspace and to get their air defenses in place so that they could essentially shoot down these incoming missiles from Iran. Because of that, it sent a message to the US of, look, we don't want more. This entire time, Iran has been in this position where they have not wanted this war. It has been Israel and the US that have brought this war
Yeah.
home to Iran. And so I think it was very notable that they responded the way they did. Now, I know that there are some people watching and a lot of people online that they wanted to see a massive response, right? They look at Iran and they feel like it's some paper tiger because it's not acting in the ways that they think that it should, or it's not using and showing enough military might. But I think we have to remember that there is a lot of strategy at play here. And Iran is also looking at the bigger picture and at the long game here when it comes to dealing with the US and dealing with Israel. So while I'm with you, I don't think that this war is over just yet. I do think it's very notable that you have Iran in this position where they're saying, hey, we do not want to expand this war. We are doing everything we can to tell you that we want a ceasefire because no matter how long this current ceasefire lasts, no matter how soon we see us going back to the US and Israel bombing Iran and Iran retaliating, we still have to remember that Iran at least did what they could to ensure that there would be a ceasefire, to try to show the US and Israel that they wanted peace. And that's something that the rest of the world really needs to be paying attention to when it comes to which side was attacked, which side is saying, hey, we don't want war, and which side, on the other hand, is trying to pursue this ongoing conflict and continuing to pursue regime change. I mean, Trump was very clear about that. He got on social media and declared to everyone that, hey, regime change in Iran wouldn't be so bad. Then even today, he reposted a video with the song Bomb Bomb Iran on it. It's like, I look at this and I go, Trump is, in a lot of ways, he kind of brings everything to the surface, right? He's going to be the guy who brings all of these big tech CEOs to his inauguration because he's not really hiding anything. And in this case, we're watching him bring it all to the surface. The overall goal, which has always been the US goal, Democrat, Republican, doesn't really matter. They have always wanted to pursue regime change in Iran. And now we're seeing the US in a place where it's just being, I would say, a bit more open about it.
Mm-hmm. Not to mention, Sarah from DD Geopolitics, by the way, shout out to her. She was on a space and she's been she was mentioning about how MAGA is the biggest bait and switch ever. And she was basically saying how Trump's a madman and how, he betrayed his fan base, which he was never really America first. I mean, he's in it for the money. He's a con man. He's the biggest, the most pro-Israel president ever. He was, and not to mention Palantir and how you have the Rachel. Just before I finish speaking, who are the military people that Palantir, the top Palantir people, have been put in the military thing in America? They've been put in there.
I'm not as familiar with that. I know
It,
Palantir more
it,
so as the company that has more so had ties to the Trump administration by the way of JD Vance and some of these other
yeah,
top
yeah, yeah,
insiders.
yeah, 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 yeah. I don't. Sorry if I get that wrong, but she, points out, and it's funny because all these people, thought that Trump was going to be this. He's not. He's just another puppet, and it's just Parler. You got to remember, that Parler now, especially when you have like the head of Parler basically saying a year ago that in America will probably be in a free front war with with Russia fighting Ukraine, China fighting Taiwan, and Iran. I mean, this is all a part of the like North American Union agenda, part of the globalist agenda that, the technocracy that these globalist elite want to build, and especially how they're spreading Palantir. This is what it's all about. This, the reason why they want to go after Iran is because of that, for the Great Israel Project, for all of it. It's like, it's really messed up. And, like, sorry, Rachel, if I have to be spaffing on, but it's really like, it's scary, because basically like how you have Palantir in charge of like the head of the military in America now, basically something. Sorry if I got that wrong, but yeah, it's really messed up. It's really really messed up. It is, and Sarah was really pointing out how like, oh, it's just stupid. It's just like how it doesn't matter who gets in. It's always the same thing. It's just it's really sad, Rachel. It really is sad.
Yeah, yeah, it is. And Sarah, for anyone watching, Sarah Bills is a great follow. I think she's done a lot more research into, Palantir and kind of where the really tentacles of the beast are within the US government. I would not be surprised if they're far into the US military. I know when she was on my show last, she was talking about the ways in which Palantir has been used or rather by the International Atomic Energy Agency with their Mosaic AI platform to collect data points within Iran. So, of course, Iran is in this position. They're like, hey, we want to work with the international community, right? So then you have this UN nuclear watchdog that comes in and says, okay, we're going to monitor all of your nuclear facilities, make sure that everything's above board. Of course, we don't have any monitoring of Israel and their nuclear weapons because that's not something that they're allowed to talk about. But when it comes to Iran, the IAEA has been a
For
central
them to bring.
part.
So there, Rachel's back. Sorry, Rachel, the internet went off. Go ahead. I was just improvising. Go ahead, keep talking.
Oh, okay. I apologize if that's on my end. Again, my connection may be failing me a bit. Um, yeah, so I guess I was saying that when it comes to the Palantir's involvement in the IAEA within the UN, they've been used to gather data points within Iran, which was one of the ways that we were getting these reports before Israel initially attacked that Iran was in a position where it had everything in place to build 9 nuclear bombs, right? So that was the claim that the US and Israel were in this position of insisting we have to go forward and target Iranian nuclear facilities because of course they're about to build a nuclear bomb. But that was all based on these data points and this predictive AI analysis that was gathered by Palantir by their Mosaic AI program. And so it's really interesting to see all of the areas in which they're involved. And it also kind of calls out exactly as you were noting there, it's hard to trust the international community as a whole and the UN when so much of it is based on the corruption that is fueled by the US and by Israel. And it makes it really hard for a country like Iran to do all of this and to try to comply and to try to keep everything so that they're not attacked when, as we saw over the last couple of weeks, they were still attacked anyway by both Israel and by the US.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is something like that, Rachel, that does, really expose a lot of the things. Rachel, when you look at the thing, who would you say are the real winners and the real losers out of this, in the ceasefire? And what do you think about, a lot of Iranians saying the ceasefire is a mistake?
Yeah, I think that, ultimately the losers are always going to be the civilian population. And that's no matter which way you turn, because of the fact that, as we know, there's not really much more here than just this, okay, agreement. We are going to literally cease fire, but nothing has actually been resolved. And that's kind of my biggest concern looking at this, the fact that you still have all of these issues. You have the US in this place where Trump bragged about the fact that he used these negotiations with Iran to then turn right back around and attack Iran. And so, because of that, he's shown to Iran that they cannot trust the US and they certainly cannot trust Donald Trump. And so, my concern moving forward is kind of this question of, okay, how do we move forward with the negotiations? I mean, I know that Iran is in this position where their president is saying, hey, yeah, let's negotiate, let's have talks. But I get concerned about the fact that, it makes you wonder just how much the Iranian government is really trusting of this process when the US has made it clear so blatantly that they cannot be trusted, that they want regime change in Iran. And I also understand the frustration too, coming from people within Iran, where they look at this and they say, hey, we should not have agreed to a ceasefire. We should have continued this fight, right? We were just getting to the point where we were really hitting Israel hard. We could have done more, and so on and so forth. And I completely understand that, even though I'm not necessarily a military analyst directly, I do understand that position of, hey, let's not back down now. Let's not agree to a ceasefire with a party that we can't trust. My concern watching kind of how this was playing out and how this was escalating was the fact that, we do know that Israel does have nuclear weapons. And you had Israel's defense minister sit there and say that if Iran continued to retaliate, that we would all see Tehran burn. And when I'm seeing a statement like that, I'm going, that doesn't exactly sound like someone who is talking, who is afraid of using every capacity possible to target their enemy or their opponent in this case. When it comes to the winners, I think that that's more so going to be a long-term thing. I don't know that we have any immediate winners. Maybe, I know that Trump wants to make it look like he is the one who brokered this, like he got everything figured out. But I think that that's more so a short-term, quote unquote, win, if you want to call it that. I think that long-term, we have to take into account the fact that, no matter how long the ceasefire lasts, this war is still ongoing, and there still is nothing that has been fully resolved here. We don't have any kind of major agreement between Israel and Iran. And we also have to take into account the fact that Israel is still continuing to target the Palestinians in ongoing genocide, right? We're seeing reports of dozens of Palestinians being killed by Israel on a near daily basis. And on top of that, Israel is still continuing to bomb Lebanon, even though it's supposed to have a ceasefire agreement in place with Hezbollah. Israel has also violated that agreement on a near daily basis. So if you're in Iran's shoes, you're looking at this and going, how is it possible that they can trust Israel whatsoever to adhere to any kind of agreement, let alone even just a simple ceasefire, when they don't seem capable of doing it anywhere else?
Rachel, what do you think about the people who are saying that, like, oh, Russia, because how Russia and like China and Iran are in a lot like our friends and stuff like that. What do you think about all the people who say that, oh, Russia and China need to come and help Iran? They're not doing anything to help Iran, because you're getting the same people who say that they're the same ones who will blame Russia for the fall of Syria, which is what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I understand that frustration, right? Because we have so much talk about this growing multipolar world, and there's a lot of optimism about where that world is headed. And, you look at all of the things that Israel is doing, or Israel is doing now, really, the US is doing now, is what I meant to say. But I guess they're kind of one and the same in some cases. And you think, okay, this has to catch up to them at some point, right? The consequences of all of their horrific foreign policies and all of the civilians that have died as a result, the reality is that those consequences don't really come overnight. Granted, they do come at some point, but as it stands right now, China and Russia are in a position where they have to put their own countries first. And especially for a country like Russia, where they're in a position where they're dealing with this war in Ukraine. And while, yes, they are winning the war in Ukraine, they have to make sure that it stays that way. And so I understand the places where they, did what they could in Syria. They're doing what they can when it comes to their help for Iran. I mean, we saw as Russia's president and Iran's foreign minister met in Moscow on Monday and had discussions there. And you saw Vladimir Putin openly condemning these attacks that were carried out by Israel and by the US against Iran and referring to them as unprovoked, saying, hey, Iran was attacked. We stand with this country. And at the same time, you also had reports out there last week about, cargo planes coming from China with possible military equipment. I don't know quite how valid and confirmed those are. But I do think that there's a lot going on behind the scenes that we may not necessarily see. And at the same time, there's also a lot that comes into play. If you're expecting Chinese troops or Russian troops to show up in Iran or to, send fighter jets or so on and so forth, there's a lot more that goes into that than just making a snap decision and making it so. And so I think that that's something that we have to take into account as we watch this unfold. We also have to take into account the fact that from everything we see, it does not appear that Iran has asked for that help, right? That's another thing too. If Iran is crying out and is calling for all of these other countries to provide help and they're not doing it, then that's one conversation. But as it seemed, Iran had it handled in terms of its targeting of Israel. Now, did Iran lose hundreds of people? Yes. And that is incredibly tragic, and I know that there are dozens of families that are felt that they're feeling those losses right now, that are looking around at the destruction that was carried out and that are obviously very much affected by it. And I do not think that that is something that should be taken lightly. I do think, from the people that I've talked to within Iran, they've talked about the spirit of unity there, right? The fact that you have people banding together, knowing that they are fighting a common enemy when it comes to the US and Israel, and knowing that they are the ones that are being attacked and targeted. And I think that that's very notable at a time when you have the US talking about regime change, because the way that they carry out regime change is, of course, by dividing the public. They go in there, they make sure they have lots of propaganda, lots of media coverage, and they really try to sow divide in the public and to create some sort of uprising and to make it look like it is completely generated by the people in, insert country here. They've done the same blueprint time and
Connections a
time
bit off.
again for
No, she's back.
decades.
Yeah, keep going, Rachel. Keep going.
Yeah, and so because of that, because you're hearing all of these stories of unity coming out of Iran, I think that that's very, very telling right now, because that is the opposite of what the US wants to see. And it also kind of reminds us of the only possible way that the multipolar world is going to succeed, which is standing together when it comes to the people within these individual nations, but also these other major countries standing with each other. And we are seeing a version of that coming from China and Russia right now. I know it's not quite as involved as some people would like, but I do think that Russia and China are very aware of what's at stake here, aware of just how hurt they would be if the Iranian government were to fall and if the US were to be successful in achieving any kind of regime change.
Mm-hmm. Rachel, when you look at that at the same time of what's going on there, what's it going to talk about with Iran? What do you think about what would happen if Iran decided to close the Strait of Hormuz? What would happen?
Yeah, that's an interesting factor. And I know that the Iranian parliament, according to reports, had voted in favor of that it was, we were hearing that the decision was just up to Iranian security officials to decide whether or not to close the Strait of Hormuz in response, right, as a version of retaliation to these attacks. That would bring energy traffic to a screeching halt. And I don't think that many people fully understand just how much of an impact that would have. I mean, here in the US, the thing that makes the American people wake up and pay attention is gas prices, right? If gas prices get too high, then all of a sudden they're turning on the news and going, okay, what the hell happened, right? They don't really care before that. But when gas prices are affected, that is like the number one indicator. Not only would gas prices skyrocket, but arguably, depending on how long the strait was closed, you would see oil traffic come to a screeching halt. And the longer that it's closed, the more of an effect it has, the more that Trump would likely be on the phone with Iran, begging them to intervene. And what's also interesting is that we've heard a lot of talk about Ansar Allah in Yemen, right? The Houthis that the media here in the West can't seem to figure out. But one of the things that they have said that they would do is they said, hey, if Iran is attacked by the US, if this conflict continues to escalate, then that they would also intervene and that they would close the Bab el-Mandeb Strait as well. So there's a lot of movement that we could see happen if this is to really start to escalate. And I think that that's one of the reasons why you did see Iran agree to a ceasefire when they did, is not because they are out of options, it's because they have so many options that they all kind of serve as warning signs and as deterrents. Yeah, can you hear
going,
me?
Rachel? Keep going. Sorry, but
Yeah, and so they all kind of just serve as warning signs and as deterrents to the rest of the world that these are all of the things that Iran is capable of doing. They can move to close the Strait of Hormuz. They can bring energy traffic and a lot of other versions of traffic to a halt. They can target U.S. bases in the region. They can also target a lot of these other little countries and kingdoms in the region. The fact that Iran called Qatar and said, hey, we're letting you know that we are going to carry out these retaliatory strikes targeting the largest U.S. military base in the Middle East. That was notable because they could also just carry out that attack without any kind of warning. And I think for so many of these regional countries, they're holding on by a thread in the sense that they're trying to juggle things. They're trying to juggle dealing with the U.S., trying to make it look like, oh, they stand with Palestine and, oh, they're condemning what Israel's doing, but never really taking any action to condemn Israel, to stop the genocide, to cut off any sorts of ties with Israel. And so I think that a lot of those different regimes in the Middle East are much more unstable than I would say the US really realizes that they are, but I think that Iran is very much aware of it.
Yeah. That is very, very true. Sorry about the connection again, Rachel. It was a bit bad at the moment.
That's okay. It sounds like it's okay on.
Did you hear me? Or no?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Sorry if it was annoying you, the connection was.
No, that's okay. I was going to say, it looks like it's okay on my end. I haven't gotten any.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, it's looking like it's okay on my end.
It is very scary because... Yeah. I was going to say, it is very scary because if Iran does fall, it is going to do a lot of damage to the multipolar world. And it's even because a lot of people do think that Russia will be next, China will be next. And not to mention, when you look at what's going on in Syria at the moment, speaking about Iran, look at what's going on in Syria. You're seeing the current president of Syria, Durrani, who actually is a CIA Mossad puppet, who's going around. There's a bit of a genocide going on. Have you heard about it, Rachel? The Alawites? That's correct, right? Isn't it? You've heard about that, right, Rachel? That genocide that's going on. It's just, and it really shows you. I mean, Syria is just a perfect example of why you cannot trust Israel. And it's just like, God forbid what would happen to Iran. Iran would just become, because of course they want to get that king, what's his name, Rachel? That king, the Zionist king, the descendant of the royal family
Yeah, I'm gonna be honest. I do not have. It's one of those I can see his face in my mind. I don't have his name right in front of me. I yeah, but yeah, it's been interesting to watch. I've been also kind of keeping an eye on Syria, and I think that Syria is in that position where it is a big warning sign, and exactly as you were saying there, I think that that's why everyone needs to be really paying attention to the situation in Iran right now, because for so many years the Syrian government stayed, right? For so many years they were not overthrown. And what was happening behind the scenes, as we now see it very plainly, was that Syria was being hit by all of these different sanctions coming from the West. Syria was being targeted in a number of ways, and those sanctions were being used to hollow out their military, to hollow out their economy. And then suddenly the Syrian government falls. And that was a really big wake up call, at least it should have been, for Russia, for China, for Iran, but also a reminder, too, of what the West is capable of and what they're working towards. That's why they've had all of these crushing sanctions on Iran for so many years now, right? Putting them in this position where, yeah, we can look at it right now and say, okay, the Iranian government is still standing as it stands right now, but that's got to create a lot of major concerns, especially as we were noting before, when it comes to the attacks that Israel did carry out. The fact that so many of these assassinations and these attacks targeting Iran's air defense were carried out from inside the country, that puts you in a position where you look around and you go, okay, what does that mean for just how much the US and Israel have been at work to try to, crumble Iran's government from the inside? And when could we see the results of that? The reality is that, just like with the ceasefire, we really don't know yet how much longer things are going to last. It's more so about, kind of looking at and analyzing where things are right now. And yeah, I think definitely comparing them to where things stand in Syria. And exactly as you were noting there, I mean, you've got this, former Al Qaeda leader, former ISIS member Al Julani, who gets into Damascus, and he has all of these death squads that are filled with all of these different foreign fighters. They're not Syrian, but yet they're targeting the Syrian people. They're targeting the Alawites and the Christians and various other minorities in the region. And the US and the European countries that claim to care so much about freedom and democracy and freedom of religion, they have been basically silent. Any statements that the Trump administration has put out claiming that, they condemn these targeted killings, well, they're not backing up any of their statements with actual action, because this is what they wanted to see all along. They wanted the extremists to be in power because they can control these extremists in a way that they were never going to be able to control the government of Bashar al-Assad.
That's very true, Rachel. You absolutely are spot on there. Rachel, since it's coming up to the 50-minute mark now, we'll just, because I've got to be respectful for your time. I know you're a busy person. It's all good. What was the last thing you would like to say, Rachel, before we finish?
Yeah, I think just for anyone following this situation and, kind of paying attention to just the world of news that we live in, right? I know it can be a little bit overwhelming. And kind of as you were noting earlier, it was really overwhelming watching all of this chaos that has developed over the last few days when it came to Trump announcing a ceasefire. And then so many people online were like, no, there's not a ceasefire. That's not what's actually happening. I think it's good to remember to keep a lot of these statements, to keep looking at them and taking them with a grain of salt, to remember to, diversify the news sources that you're following. Keep an eye out for independent and alternative creators like your show here that people are going to be able to follow and watch. And to remember that this ultimately comes down to the fact that, especially when watching US politics, it's not just Democrats or Republicans. It's not just, Donald Trump. And, I know some people will look at him and think that he's just bringing in pure chaos, but a lot of this has been written in US foreign policy playbooks for decades now. DC is filled with all of these little think tanks, just like the Brookings Institute. And they write these policy papers that serve as a blueprint for the way in which the Trump administration, the Obama, Biden administration, right, whoever is in the White House at the moment, for the ways in which they operate and the policy that they put in place. And we've seen that very clearly this time around, as you had the Brookings Institute in particular. They had this policy paper back in 2009, which listed 9 different ways that the US could target Iran. And one of the ways that they listed on there was that the US could engage in direct talks, right? Engage in nuclear talks, exactly as we saw Trump do in recent months with Iran, and use that as a cover while behind the scenes encouraging Israel to carry out an attack. And we saw that play out almost as if you were reading the policy paper that was 16 years old right in front of our faces, where Israel carries out an attack and then the US acts like, oh, we had no idea, right? Israel just decided to do that on their own and they weren't connected whatsoever. And so I think it's good to keep in mind. I don't know if it helps or not, if it makes anyone feel any better, but when you're looking at US foreign policy and kind of the overall Western foreign policy that they are pursuing, a lot of it has been written in the policy papers for years now. And the overall goal, no matter who they're targeting, no matter if it's Israel versus Iran or Russia versus Ukraine, the overall goal is to target these key pillars of the multipolar world, because that's who the US is at war with. They look at all of these countries, especially Russia and China, and they say, those are our top competitors. How can we target them and how can we try to weaken them? That's why they've launched this proxy war in Ukraine, because even though they knew that it was never going to cause the Russian economy to collapse, even though they knew that there was never a chance that Ukraine was going to defeat Russia on the battlefield, the goal was to overall weaken Russia, number one, and number two, to keep Russia preoccupied, so that when the Assad government in Syria was struggling, when they were on the verge of collapse, that Russia was not able to step in the way that they were back in 2015 and 2016. The same goes for Iran. The US is looking at Iran, and while yes, you can talk about how Iran and Israel are enemies and want to target each other, the US is looking at Iran and they're going, okay, if we take out their government, then we are toppling one of the most powerful governments in the Middle East. We're also toppling a key ally of Russia and China. And so I think it's important to keep kind of coming full circle to what we talked about at the beginning, but to keep the bigger picture in mind when you're looking at these individual stories and when you're seeing the fact that the US is ultimately trying to target these key pillars of the multipolar world, and it will stop at nothing in order to do that. So if you can expect anything, you can expect the US to keep targeting Iran.
That is absolutely fantastically said, Rachel. That is brilliantly said, spot on there. Always wise with the sayings, of very wise person you are. Anyways, Rachel, where can people find you?
Yeah, so I'm on X and I'm on Telegram, both at Rach Blevins, and then I'm on YouTube, Substack, just about every other platform, Rumble, Odyssey, at Rachel Blevins. So yeah, if you follow me there, I post pretty much daily videos with analysis and interviews covering a lot of the stuff that we talked about here today.
Well, like you heard her, everyone, go follow her. Go give her, a follow on Twitter. Go to sub to her YouTube channel. She's absolutely fantastic. She's one of the best political people out there. Does fantastic interviews. You can learn so much from her. And yeah, it was an absolute pleasure to have you on my show again, Rachel. We should definitely do another show for the future. Sorry if the connection was a bit bad. I feel bad about that. Sorry about that.
No, all good. Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad that I got to join again and we got to talk about all of the latest here in this truly crazy world that we live in.
It was a pleasure having you. Remember, everyone, go support Rachel. She's fantastic. And remember to like and subscribe to this video. Also to share it with your friends and family. And remember to sub to the Welsh Republic podcast too. Thank you, everyone. God bless you all. Stay safe. Stay strong. Never give up. And yeah.